Hello everyone, Mr. Snow here, and again I'm going to recommend a game that's been out for over a decade that many of you have probably already played if you're interested in the series at all. Silent Hill Homecoming. And I'll go ahead and let you know, I have no real history with Silent Hill. The reason I chose to play the game in the first place was because Dead by Daylight, I enjoyed that. I played Pyramid Head, I was like, wow, this is really cool. So I went on Steam, and Homecoming was the only one they had. So I've picked that one up. Now, I am familiar with it through, I guess, what you might call cultural osmosis, because I have seen some very, very well articulated and well executed video essays on Silent Hill 2 in particular. Like, that one seems to be what many consider God's gift to gaming. But enough of my rambling, let's go ahead and get into this Silent Hill Homecoming. So, as mentioned, this is the first Silent Hill I've ever played, chosen solely because it was on Steam. Now, the iconic horror franchise I'm familiar with is Resident Evil, so my opinions are going to naturally be set against that game. And I could say right off the bat, I do consider Silent Hill Homecoming to be the far superior horror experience to the Resident Evils aside from maybe 7. Anyway, let's get into this. I am going to try my absolute best to coherently describe what is happening in this game. I only promise to try, however. Okay, so you are Alex Shepard, and you wake up in a hospital where things have already gone wrong. Blood smears everywhere, and something was killing the staff. Well, eventually you come to the other world, which is like a demonic parallel universe version of wherever you currently are. In said otherworld version of the hospital, you find your little brother Josh, who has all the self-preservation instincts of a Resident Evil villain. Then you wake up. Now you're in Shepherd's Glen, aka definitely not Silent Hill. Alex goes home to check things out and discovers his mom in a near catatonic state, her mind focused solely on Alex leaving her alone to find Josh. Alex starts looking for his brother in the cemetery of all places, which culminates in a magical teleportation to the real Silent Hill. Here he finds Josh again, who continues to run from Alex like he was a Subway spokesman. This is also where we first see our favorite new Dead by Daylight killer, Pyramid Head. But don't get too used to him. Well, you solve enough puzzles there to wake up in the police station, magically teleporting back to Shepherd's Glen. Now we meet Wheeler, the only character with any sense in this story. The chit-chat is cut short by probably my favorite segment in the game, actually, as hordes of monsters start overtaking the police station. Alex gets to fight his way out, find Elle, lose Wheeler, and then lose Elle, all of which leads him to the doctor's office of one Dr. Fitch, who for some reason is covered in blood. Well, you do some digging around, take a trip to the other world, and kill a giant demon doll come to life. Shortly after, Alex gets a hold of a fancy pants dagger that lets him get into his basement, and wouldn't you know it, after doing so, your mom gets kidnapped and you get another free trip to Otherworld. After dealing with some mildly irritating puzzles, Alex is freed and runs into Elle again, who somehow survived being dragged away by monsters. No, really, it never explains this. Last you saw her, she got attacked by something, and there is a very pronounced blood trail leaving the scene. I must have interpreted the situation wrong because I assumed she was at least injured, but nope, she's no worse for the wear. Well, you find Wheeler too, and the trio hops on a boat back to Silent Hill. Whilst on the boat ride there, some Order members interrupt your heart-to-heart with Elle and kidnap her right from under your nose. No, seriously, they just ninja their way onto your boat from seemingly nowhere. And you know what, this section is kind of dragging on, so let me just give you the remaining cliff notes. Your mom dies, your dad dies, the parents were sacrificing their kids to keep God happy, and it turns out you accidentally killed your brother some undefined time ago. Your parents planned to sacrifice you instead of your brother, and because he died and you're the only child left, it screwed up their plans, leading them to return to the Order, which brought about the very demons they were trying to stave off with human sacrifice. And the final boss can only be described as a giant, pregnant demon Dr. Octopus. Depending on your in-game choices, you either make it out with Elle or become a Pyramid Head. There's a couple other endings, but those are the only two that make any sense to me. Alex is really the only one we need to go in-depth on. When he's introduced, we're led to believe he's a military veteran who has now come home when he finds things gone to literal hell, and he's on a mission to save his brother. This is why he can't simply turn around and waltz out of town. There's a lot of subtle clues into his family past in the game, most notably coming from the family photos, as he's not in any of them. The only complaint I have is a lot of this troubled childhood is told and not shown. Alex's dad says they wanted to have him grow up not knowing love so it'd be easier to sacrifice him, but aside from the family photos and the one time your dad understandably yells at you after Josh dies, there's not a whole lot that they do. His mom is much the same way. She comes off as deeply depressed and fixated on Josh's safety. Well, that's what Alex is worried about too, so she doesn't come off as that bad either. I bring this up because what essentially boils down to a positive or negative action dictates your ending with regards to your parents' fate. My first playthrough, I never felt like Alex would curse and condemn his parents with the information I had. The rest of the cast are either crazy, evil, some combination, or supporting protagonists. Elle is a typical supporting female, Wheeler is a typical supporting gun, and personally I like to think he made it out of Silent Hill as well. Judge Holloway is probably the closest thing to a main antagonist, and as alluded to earlier, she's just crazy and, not trying to make a pun here, gets drilled to death by Alex. The game works when it wants to. It randomly crashed at the end of segments, forcing me to redo boss fights, and don't even think about trying to have anything going in the background. Not even your favorite music is allowed by the gods of Silent Hill. What's more, the game was clearly not optimized for PC. The graphics for the controls are listed as numbers instead of as a PlayStation or Xbox controller, even being color-coded differently. So when I get a QuickTime event where the game wants me to mash the 2 button, I end up getting my arm ripped off because I was hitting A instead of B. Some of these puzzles aren't head-scratchers so much as they're what the heck were the developers smoking? You've got a well-crafted puzzle that clearly presents the idea behind it and has a sense of reason to it with how you're supposed to piece the puzzle together. Then you've got a puzzle where you're presented with a bunch of wires and no real guide to what order they need to be placed in. The only way to solve it is to keep playing Process of Elimination until you finally get it. There's no eureka moment there. You leave it calling the game ridiculous. I will now and forever dub this sort of thing a Silent Hill type puzzle, where when you figure it out you audibly proclaim, well, how was I supposed to think to do that? Small one, but the nurses. So the rest of the monsters are pale monstrosities, but then you have these nurses and their well-defined racks. They're just very different to all the other enemies design-wise is all. They seem to have a set theme going with the monsters otherwise. They're all pale, they have some sort of sharp thing coming from their body somehow, and they tend to kind of be noodly, if that makes any sense, but not the nurses. It really doesn't make a difference, but it's just something I wanted to point out. On that note, what was the point of having Pyramid Head in the game? It shows up in like 2 cutscenes, kills your dad, and dips out, never to be seen again. This is now officially the correct way to make a map in a game. Silent Hill now has the gold standard for in-game maps. What it does is it blocks off rooms you discover you can't open as you progress, as well as marking doors you need keys for as you discover them. It feels very natural. There isn't a magic force out there telling you a locked door is in the area when you first enter. The map marks it locked when you know it's locked, almost like your character has a marker and is filling it in as he goes. I really like how the boss fights are the dead children come back to life in a sense. Well, maybe not the final boss, considering Josh wasn't the sacrifice and just happened to die. The bosses all have some design elements that incorporate their method of murder. The first boss is dug up from the ground as the child was buried alive. The second boss has claws and fangs as the child was stabbed to death. And the third human centipede boss dies from breathing air as the child was strangled to death. In fact, the imagery in general I think is handled really well. Well, except for Pyramid Head and the nurses, of course, but I've harped on them enough. Strange enough, I really like how limited the combat and ammunition is. See, ammo caps at 3 magazines per weapon, and trying to down even the most basic enemies with the pistol uses at least half a magazine. I really felt like I had to carefully manage my weapons even at the end of the game, as opposed to a Resident Evil while I'm strolling up to the last boss with grenade launchers, shotguns, magnums, and enough rounds to clear the entire game from the beginning all over again. It was a real nice change of pace. My final praise will sound a bit odd, because all I hear about the non-numbered Silent Hills is they're all the bad one. Just unilaterally, across the board, they all supposedly suck. So if this is one of the bad ones, I'm very interested in playing the main series, especially Silent Hill 2. So yeah, Silent Hill Homecoming. I want to talk about something real fast, because I forgot to put it into the script, and it was starting to drag on a little too long anyway, and as I mentioned, the OBS couldn't exactly record all the time with the game's refusal to adequately work on PC. But anyway, personal theory on this: I can't help but feel as though the big plot twist at the end, where Alex Shepard was never in the military, he accidentally killed his brother, and then went to a mental hospital afterwards. I can't help but feel like that was tacked on by executive meddling at the very end of the game's development, and I'll explain why I feel that way. Because if you look at the game's story, if you take out the hospital portion in the very beginning, and you redo the end to be a matter of whether or not you saved Joshua, you've got a pretty complete story of guy comes home from traveling, from work, from whatever. He comes home, it's hit the fan, and you've got to save the day. And you uncover the cult's human sacrifice along the way, and you're trying to save your brother from becoming the next human sacrifice. It plays off pretty straightforward that way. It only gets muddy whenever you try saying that he killed his brother and then he was in a mental hospital. So how did he get out of the mental hospital? You know, stuff like that. But that also brings up Pyramid Head as well. I would imagine he was tacked on at the very end also, because he shows up, like I said, for about 2 cutscenes. You never interact with him throughout the regular gameplay. You never see him throughout the regular gameplay. He's just in 2 cutscenes where he walks by in the hotel and he bisects your dad. But that's just a personal theory of mine. I would be curious to find out if I'm right, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. I still enjoyed Homecoming. Like I said, I liked it. I think you'll like it, and hey, you have a great rest of your day.